Well, hey folks, it's your old pal, King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Hit like and subscribe, and other words that you expect to hear at the beginning of people's YouTube videos. This one's going to be a little bit of a viewer request. I'm going to talk about the Coalition Wars, an adventure series that was produced in like the early to mid 2000s. During this period of time in my 20s where I, kind of stepped away from role-playing games and nerd stuff in general for about a good 8 years of my life before getting back into gaming in my early 30s. So, I didn't get to experience the release of these things in real time and how, players actually reacted to it and how game masters actually reacted to it. They are very controversial. In some ways, they do something very well that I think more role-playing game companies should do when they're writing out like big, thick source books or series that are supposed to outline entire campaigns, or where you write it out. The events occur without player character interference in the write-up, so you actually see what will happen without player characters doing anything to stop all this, which is helpful so that it can carry on in the background if the player characters in their adventuring get distracted by their own personal bullshit or decide, like, for some reason to get hung up on some random clue that really wasn't all that important, but for some reason to them, this is the thing they're going to go investigating, and it takes them all off on some sidetrack where they're not dealing with the thing you want them to deal with. Knowing how the events are going to unfold without them allows you to kind of still be able to kind of keep track of what's going on over there until they finally can be steered back on, and then see that by having not been focusing where they should be focusing, bad, worse things are now happening, which may, trigger some sort of guilt reflex that makes them actually want to take it more seriously, hopefully. The books themselves, three of them are like really useful. A couple of them just kind of give you a back and forth. One of them is kind of an odd anomaly. The mistake, I feel, with the whole thing was the end cap for it all, which is Rift's Aftermath, which is basically just like kind of recanonizes the entire setting for the post-war era. Like what's going on all around the world at the end of this. So it kind of just like resets the entire setting, locking the events of these books into the history of the setting. However, the thing that does it wrong is because the fact that these are written just as like this is what's going to happen if player characters don't step in and do the heroic thing to prevent the bad ending. It means that the bad ending is now melded and welded into the setting. Like even for some reason, Savage Worlds Rifts still actually has this as part of its continuity. These events happened, though they've decided to kind of be a divergent timeline where instead of the Minion War, now you got the Twilight Sparkle Legion, or wherever the fuck they're calling themselves, an alternate brand new organization founded by Lord Coke, because that's what he's going to do after watching his Cyber Knights break apart in front of him, is he's going to go start a new organization, and because that's not going to happen again, and he's going to have no reason to feel guilty twice in the future. The thing with Tolkien is that they were kind of like the attempted good guy version of the Federation of Magic in the setting. The Federation of Magic was like clearly, like dark sider type magic users. They're in the magic zone in Ohio and Tennessee and all that. Maybe a couple of the city states that are part of the overall Federation, like might not be as evil as, like, say, Lord Dunstan and his crew, but there's a willingness to deal with the superhuman and the paranormal that is potentially questionable at times, and Tolkien was maybe more like even going down with the name taken for the kingdom, a bit more like an intrusion of high fantasy into the Rift's North American setting. The other major, magic civilization is Laszlo, New Laszlo, at least of like the post-apocalyptic societies. But really, they have more in common with Scyscape and Synex in terms of they're purely scholarly and demeanor and interest. They're not a military organization. Despite the fact that, like, logistically they're right in the middle of the flight path between Chi-Town and Free Quebec and Ironheart, they haven't been as aggressive and rebellious and anti-coalition as, say, Tolkien had been. Also, Tolkien was like just a matter of, a couple hundred miles at most away from the borders of the coalition, whereas like the Federation of Magic is kind of pushed back and shielded by the Magic Zone in many ways. And even the Laszlos are kind of isolated because of all the magic energies and rifts and ley lines surrounding, the Ontario Peninsula and all that kind of stuff. So, it was kind of inevitable that this was going to happen to Tolkien. They knew it. They had ample forewarning. Yes, picking up and leaving so that you're not all massacred, like, that doesn't feel good. It's an incredibly hard effort. In and of itself will probably cause some death and destruction, just because not everyone's going to be in the condition to be picked up and moved somewhere safer. And there's something about it that just strikes anyone as just being like cowardly defeat, kind of, no one wants to be that. No one wants to admit that they don't have what it takes. How are you supposed to maintain your authority and power over your underlings if you can be forced into retreat by something greater? Like, why should they trust in you if you can't protect them from the thing, kind of a thing. So, like, there's a lot of psychological, reasons why the people of Tolkien would lock themselves into position. And unfortunately, though, they are closer to the Federation of Magic on the scale of societies as opposed to Laszlo. Like, immediately, Laszlo's like, we're not going to have any part of this. We're actually going to stick to our principles of trying to promote peace and not resort to violence just because we feel threatened. That's the thing about having principles, is like a lot of people like to pretend they have principles, and a lot of people do believe in principles, and there's a reason to like try to strive towards some sort of code of honor or code of conduct in your life, but no one's going to perfectly achieve it, in large part because holding to principles is really fucking hard sometimes. We have a lot of just natural instincts and just tactical circumstances of life that tell you should be doing one thing, even if your principles say you should be doing something else. Laszlo makes the harder thing of just they're going to sit this one out and, watch, friends and allies die in the process. But, joining in the fight is just going to bring the fight onto them, kind of a thing. There's a kind of a Zen kind of mentality of, the best way to win a fight is to not fight at all, kind of a thing. That's why, in a way, Laszlo's really the only victor out of this little triangle of civilizations here. Because, sure, the coalition wins, but at kind of a heavy cost of their soul. They go from being people who are, not good guys, decidedly not the good guys of the setting, even if there's a certain rationale behind their point of view about alien life and magic users. Their reaction to it is way too overboard and trying to assert control and this rigid idea of what humanity's supposed to be, despite the fact that humanity's always in flux and changing. But they went from just kind of being cartoon Nazis to being actual Nazis in the course of the events of Tolkien. The thing is, Tolkien followed suit. They also had death camps. They also started doing the Federation of Magic, and their desire for victory and insistence on winning, and then as the events of the war go on, the need for revenge and all that kind of stuff. They start, summoning darker and darker powers and entities, the daemonics, shadow dragons, stuff like that. They start crossing the line too. They start having their own death camps for coalition POWs and stuff. And I think therein is the source, is that, a lot of role players inherently want a nice, clean, cartoony D&D game, and Rifts is, I don't even know if grimdark is a good description for it. There's certainly elements of it that, could smack one of being Warhammer-esque, but the key is in the very first book, there's several adventure hooks, especially the one about, the Key of Solomon, that undo the entire thing. This is all should have kind of been optional, and that's why Aftermath was the mistake, because it locked it in as having happened the way it's just described without player characters doing anything about it. And so, just do the hard work, have the characters do the like hard, probably suicidal mission of getting the Key of Solomon and somehow putting it in the hands of the Emperor Prosek. And most of the war stops. There's several key points in the very early adventures where player characters could derail the entire thing and make it stop in its tracks and not unfold the way it unfolded. You know, like all of Rifts should have just been written from the point of view of the year 101 PA. Unfortunately, by the time they even got around to writing these books, they had already established you know, a precedent that, you know, the Ruled Book series kind of slowly lurches the setting forward a couple of years at a time, and it's just kind of natural them to like cap off because of the timing. Like, you know, it's not like there's a bunch of new gamers coming in around the time that these, you know, books were coming out. This is a time where you're kind of like getting by living on your locked in audience that you had developed in the 90s. And so, you know, it only made sense to like adapt the more current versions of the books you're putting out to you know, account for all this. But the people themselves didn't necessarily want a story where, you know, the space Nazis win and the good guys become just as bad, if not slightly worse at times, than the bad guys. We're like the most triumphant heroic moment is you know, when like General Holmes leads his coalition troops through the Zytikix territory and manages to survive, you know, this like what should have been like a death sentence to them all. The whole reason why his section of the army was pushed into Zytikix territory was, you know, now they're there, the Zytikix will take care of it. But because the coalition had spent so much time studying the fucking things, he manages to be able to march his whole army through Zytikix territory and then come around onto Tolkien's flank before the very, you know, final sequence of the siege of the city itself. Which is the most, you know, badass thing, the moment in the canon version of the events of this, and it happens, you know, at the behest of a coalition general and his troops. So, you know, but it's like, it's the way it was going to play out. It's like there's like no logical way for Tolkien to have won this. The coalition was going to have more machines to bear, and those machines, those weapons, the cyborgs, the robots, the skelelots, you know, power armors, giant robots, all of it, and also always in the end still having nukes that they don't want to use because they're afraid of, you know, like putting too much energy into ley lines, especially since they'd be using them on a city that has several like ley line nexuses in it. But it was always there in their back pocket. There's no way for Tolkien to get out of this, and I guess it's just, even though like a lot of their population aren't human, you can still just say it's just stubborn human nature that made it just inevitable that they weren't going to leave and that this was going to happen. And yeah, and then they canonized it so that even though if you play the adventure and have them do something to stop it all, any new source book you get is going to be in a universe where it all went bad for Tolkien, and where the coalition crossed a lot of lines. And yeah, so I guess think of that as you will. Generally, I've never run through the Coalition Wars. I don't address it too much. But, you know, I for the most part, like, you know, the games I've run have been in, like, Dinosaur Swamp and a lot of stuff in Lone Star and, you know, more foreign settings, or having, you know, weird adventures that start off in the Palladium world and then lead in to, you know, like the Africa sourcebook storyline with the apocalypse. Like, those are the kinds of things I've generally done with Rifts. Like, recently now, I'm kind of just running like a solo campaign for my wife, for her to learn the Rift setting, playing a rogue scholar, and I'm actually, like, for the first time, actually having to address this setting specifically and the stuff I'm running. In terms of, like, just setting information, and for if you want to just be able to run Tolkien in the 5 years of the setting that were going on before any of the events in these adventure modules happened, the first book, which is just Rift's Siege on Tolkien Chapter 1, and then the last two of the actual adventures, Tolkien 5, Shadows of Evil, and Final Siege, give you like the most actual specific information in terms of what the various smaller kingdoms around Central Tolkien is, and, you know, maps of the city, shops, places to go, NPCs, and all that kind of stuff. which is like why I say like these are like the most three essential, if you can say that, of the source books for this series. Books 2 and 3, Coalition Overkill and Sorcerer's Revenge. They provide some interesting NPCs, but like they basically are just describing the early back and forth of the first year or so of the war, where there's just like a lot of, you know, like we push the line forward, you push the line back kind of stuff, but there's nothing like necessarily like none of the big over the top stuff of the final phases of the war had started yet. So they're the kind of the easiest to skip past and over, unless you just like for completionist's sake, or you just want to know the details of what happened, or just to mine these for NPCs. There are a few good NPCs to be found in both these books that can also be transplanted elsewhere. If you run riffs from the year 101 PA, all this is 5 years away. You could pre-foreshadow a lot of stuff for it if you do want to incorporate these events for like a campaign set, you know, in the Central Corridor, North America. But like, you know, in terms of like hard setting, generic setting information, like these are, you know, yeah, probably the least useful. And also in terms of just for like role playing through or adventuring through the events of this series, these are also probably the two weakest links of them all. And then the book 4, Cyber Knights, which I wish Palladium would do more of this kind of stuff. You know, they've had several source books where, you know, like in Juicer Uprising gives you a bunch of more juicers and kind of is like a juicer book. For some weird reason, Canada has all these variants on headhunters, and the Bionic source book kind of serves, you know, as like, you know, just like a generic source book for, you know, Bionic characters, obviously. But I wish they had a few more books that are kind of more like this, where a bit more streamlined in concept. It doesn't really give a whole bunch of specific events going on in the war itself. It just goes into good detail about Cyber Knight history and their culture, and goes into the divide that starts to happen over the course of the war between the Cyber Knights. That if you're setting, you know, your game after these events in the year 109, whether or not you're playing the Palladium version and dealing with the Minion War, or you're playing the Savage Worlds version with, you know, the new Tomorrow Legion thing, the Cyber Knights have kind of gotten over this divide. But I kind of liked the idea that the Cyber Knights were kind of like morally split. You know, like if the Jedi, instead of being extinguished by the Clone Wars, were instead just like permanently rifted in two because of essential disagreements about whether or not they should be participating and taking sides in something like this. Like, the Cyber Knights were kind of like a middle ground where like the leadership wanted them to do like Laszlo and like do the hard thing of like, yeah, we want to participate, we feel like we should participate, we're friends and all, but it's just going to make things worse for people in other places if we stick our nose in. But unlike Laszlo, a bunch of Cyber Knight underlings were like, fuck that, we're going to go help our friends. And in the end, like, you know, it didn't stop Tolkien from being, you know, bombarded into the ground. So, was Coke right? Like, so much, there's like a lot of things I find in reading through the Savage World books, what little information there actually is on the setting in them. I like how what they choose to frame as being important in Savage Worlds, but like there's like actually very little like information about these things in them. You know, if you have never read any other Palladium books, maybe that seems to be enough. But because I'm coming to the Savage Worlds books from the perspective of someone used to like all these dozens and dozens of thick text-rich tomes about the setting, giving you all sorts of like intricate details for motivations and histories and character backgrounds and stuff, and then you get to something that's like a one-paragraph first-person perspective blurb, and then another short paragraph about what this town is like, and then some stats, and then just move on to the other thing. Like, it feels unsatisfying, but I do at least like how the things they're choosing to emphasize on. But so much of it, like there's just a lot of things I just feel like it's kind of like trying to undo what this did to the setting. It ignores the Minion War. It doesn't want the Coalition to be, after the events of Tolkien, to then be thrust into this position of being like stalwart champions of Earth. Like, you know, It's almost like Palladium's almost doubling down on the thing that caused like protest within their ranks about this, and Savage Worlds instead does this other thing, which sets up, the coalition is now going to fight the Federation of Magic. Thematically, that's just redundant. Like, we just had the coalition versus a bunch of magic users, and so we're going to have coalition versus magic users part 2. Like Minion War at least was something a little different. They were creatures of magic, but they're operating differently, and because of the fact that these are all more subversive kind of creatures, especially with the devils, like an army of demons invading your planet might not necessarily operate like a platoon of American soldiers invading another country would. Like, it's not necessarily going to play out as that kind of war. It can very much be more kind of a subtle thing of subterfuge and, convincing people to make backroom deals and manipulating countries and civilizations into fighting each other on your behalf so that you can then come in and reap the profits. Emperor from Star Wars, back when Star Wars was quasi-good kind of stuff. And Tomorrow Legion is just more of the same, with a, like, it's doing what that section of the audience that didn't like the Coalition Wars is doing, I guess. It's giving them the more Saturday cartoon, clearly defined good versus evil kind of stuff, instead of the gigantic, unending moral gray zone that old school classic Riffs is, where there really is no good and evil. The good people end up dying because to be principled, especially about being kind to others and being peaceful and not engaging in violence, like throughout our own history, like, those civilizations don't last long, do they? Because that's just the nature of the beast. So anyway, I guess those are my thoughts on the Coalition Wars. Not necessarily my favorite thing either. To be found out there. I find like the Gargoyle versus New German Republic stuff a lot more compelling, because that one, I don't know, like, the fact that the more obviously inhuman one is actually the one that's more on the right, that the Gargoyles actually have the more compelling reason for being what they are, is just a dynamic that's missing, I feel, in North America setting. But anyway, that's all neither here nor there. I think I've rambled on along enough about this. I can check this off the list. I wouldn't call this a lore video. I don't make lore videos. That's not what I'm doing here. So, but anyway, Coalition Wars, there you go. Buy it or don't buy it. I didn't write it, so what do I care? I mean, just if you want to, like, understand, though, like, this seminal event in the history of Riffs, you should at least get the Aftermath book, I guess, even though that's kind of the one that might have been the biggest mistake of the entire thing, because, like I said, they didn't have to lock it in as canon that this stuff happened at all. It should have just been left a free roaming optional adventure series that didn't have any, like, effect on later releases. And then that way, game masters who want to use it can have it play out however the hell it plays out, and not have this other thing where, like, you feel like, well, this is how it's supposed to end, so I gotta lock it so that no matter what, this is gonna be how it ends. So even if the player characters do some of their earlier adventuring to try to stop this all from happening, you get that one of those, like, predestination curve where the universe just rewrites events to make sure things still go this way. Like, avoid that thinking. You can run this where Tolkien wins or the Coalition wins, or neither win, and it never happens in the first place. As I say, there's several adventures, especially the one about the Key of Solomon, which is, like, not an easy ask, but averting a gigantic, North American miniaturized World War, fucking Holocaust adventure series, like, shouldn't be able to be averted, just with a wish and a prayer. It's going to take a little self-sacrifice. Might be something for higher level characters. That's why I say, like, start a campaign in the year 101 and slowly build toward this, instead of starting people out right in the middle of it, or just skip past it and just select a different zone in North America so you don't really have to deal too much really with the aftermath of it, because it's less relevant directly to what anyone the player characters are interacting with or doing. So anyway, there you go. Have a good one. Stay waspinated. Leave comments below. Buy products from Total Party Skills on DriveThruRPG. Have a Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah, and other holidays of choice. Be sure to participate in the great commercial orgy of society by buying things for other people instead of yourself, if that's your thing. And other words, stuff, I don't know. Go away now. And other catchphrases that I didn't come up with.